The final words of an empire were a warning. The last transmission from the Imperial dreadnought Eternity crackled across the void with a simple, chilling message. The Emperor is dead, the clones are waking. On the dusty fringe world of Viridia, a scavenger named Kael stumbled upon a find that would change everything. It was a stasis pod hidden in the wreckage of a forgotten ship. Inside lay a perfect duplicate of the slain galactic ruler. Before Kael could even process the discovery, the clone's eyes snapped open, locking onto him with a silent, terrifying command. In that instant, an ordinary man was propelled into a conspiracy vast enough to shatter the very cosmos. By the end of this story, you will witness the breathtaking conclusion of a galactic war and understand the true meaning of ultimate sacrifice. What happens when the most powerful ruler in history is reborn not as one man, but as 12 scattered fragments? And what terrible secret forced a dying emperor to hide his own copies? What would you do if you held the key to saving everything, but using it meant destroying what makes you you? The trading post of Port Viridia was a place of shadows and whispered deals. Kael had hoped to lose the pod and its impossible cargo in the murky flow of credits to be just another scavenger with a lucky find. But luck had a different shape now. It arrived not with a merchant's offer, but with the sudden, deafening shatter of the main entrance. Imperial inquisitors clad in matte black armor that seemed to drink the light flooded into the chamber. Their orders were not for arrest but for eradication. Every living soul in that room was a witness to be silenced. Blaster fire erupted, cutting down traders and thieves alike in a storm of searing light. In that chaos of screams and smoke, the stasis pod hissed open. The clone stepped out, not with confusion, but with a chilling, preternatural calm. His eyes, the same as the Emperor's from 1,000 historical portraits, scanned the room in an instant, calculating trajectories and threats with a speed no ordinary human could match. He moved. A fallen guard's pulse rifle was in his hands before Kael could blink. What followed was not a brawl, but a brutal symphony. Each shot from the clone's weapon was a single, precise note. He did not miss, he did not flinch. Inquisitors fell, their armor pierced at weak points only a master tactician would know. In less than a minute, the assault was over, the attackers dead, and the only sound was the crackle of damaged consoles and Kael's own ragged breath. The clone turned to him, dropping the weapon. It was the first time Kael heard its voice, a calm, resonant whisper that carried an impossible weight of command and weariness. They will not stop. This was not an attack, it was a retrieval. I am the key, and you are now the lock. The words settled into Kael's bones like ice. He was no longer a scavenger. He was a component in a machine he did not understand, a machine someone very powerful wanted broken. There was no time for questions. Sirens wailed in the distance, more official than the Inquisitors, but no less dangerous. With a clone, Echo Prime, moving beside him not as a prisoner but as a grim guide, Kael fled into the labyrinthine underbelly of the port. Their escape was a blur of dripping corridors and panicked crowds, ending at a rusting orbital shuttle whose pilot demanded triple the fare and asked no questions. As the craft shuddered away from Viridia, leaving the planet a shrinking jewel in the black, Kael looked at his silent companion. The lock and the key were now adrift in the void, hunted by an empire that had killed its own emperor. What door were they meant to open, and what would come through it when they did? The shuttle's hull screamed as it tore through the void, a spray of inquisitorial pulse fire etching scars across its viewports. They were outgunned and outmaneuvered. Echo Prime's hands flew over the controls with a pilot's grace, but it was not enough. A final, shuddering impact severed their main thrusters. The ship tumbled, a leaf in a hurricane, until the colossal shadow of a derelict vessel filled the entire forward screen. It was the Eternity, the Emperor's flagship, a ghost from the war's final hour. With no other choice, Echo Prime aimed their dying craft for a gaping hangar bay. and the universe dissolved into a cacophony of rending metal and shattering glass. Silence followed, thick and heavy. Emergency lights flickered, casting long, dancing shadows across a tomb. Kael stumbled from the wreckage, his boots crunching on frost-rimed debris. The hangar was a graveyard, frozen in grotesque poses. The skeletal remains of the Imperial Royal Guard lay where they had fallen, their ornate white armor now caskets of bone and ice. Blaster scars marred the walls, all radiating outward from the interior corridors. This was not damage from an external attack. This was a slaughter that had begun within the ship's own heart. Echo Prime moved past him, his expression unreadable. He navigated the corpse-strewn halls with a somber familiarity, his steps silent on the blood-stained deck. He led them to the bridge, a cavernous chamber where the command throne sat empty beneath a shattered viewport to the stars. At a sealed console, he placed his palm against a biometric reader. It glowed, accepting his genetic signature as the Emperor's own. A hologram sputtered to life, resolving into the gaunt, desperate face of the man they both mirrored. The recording was frantic, the Emperor's voice cracking with exhaustion and raw fear. The architect knows the Unification protocol is a lie. It is not a resurrection, it is an assimilation. My consciousness, my memories, they are not a gift to my clones, but a key for him. A key to open a door that should remain forever sealed. The image flickered, static eating at the edges. My final command stands: scatter the progenitors. Do not let the architect unite them. The fate of every living soul depends on it. The log ended, plunging them back into silence. Kael's mind reeled. The clones were not a backup. They were pieces of a puzzle, and someone called the architect wanted to assemble them into something monstrous. Before he could voice the question, a soft chime echoed in the dead quiet. On the main tactical scanner, which had shown only the emptiness of space and their own dying shuttle, 12 new life signs suddenly bloomed into existence. They were not approaching from outside. They were materializing in a perfect ring around the derelict eternity, their signatures cold, precise, and utterly hostile. The trap was not behind them on Viridia. It had been waiting for them here all along. The cold, precise life signs on the scanner were not ships at all. They were the progenitors. From the shadows behind the command throne, a figure emerged, his movements hesitant, his once pristine lab coat stained and frayed. It was Dr. Thorne, the man whose name was etched on the stasis pod Kael's team had found. His eyes, wide with a mixture of terror and awe, fixed on Echo Prime. "You are not the Emperor," Thorne whispered, his voice raspy from disuse. "You are his memory of command, his strategic instinct given flesh. I carved his consciousness like a gem, scattering the facets for safekeeping. There are 11 others out there, each a living vessel for a different piece of the whole. One holds his capacity for empathy and diplomacy, another his genius for xenobiology, a third his mastery of quantum state mechanics. They are not copies, they are chapters of a single, shattered book." Kael stared, the scale of the deception dawning on him. "You built 12 living weapons." Thorne shook his head fiercely. "I built 12 locks, and the Emperor himself was the key that could open them. He feared unification. He called the protocol a trap, a design flaw. He believed that if all 12 fragments were ever brought into resonance, it would not restore him. It would create something new, something he called the architect, a consolidated consciousness with absolute power and no humanity left to restrain it." The old man's shoulders slumped, but the war proved him wrong. The enemy we face, the storm gathering in the dark between galaxies, it requires a mind greater than any one being, even him. Unification is not our doom. It is the only weapon we have left. A deep, resonant thrum pulsed through the deck plates, vibrating in their teeth. Crimson emergency lights began a frantic, rotating dance. From the engineering core, a synthesized voice echoed through the dead ship. "Critical overload detected. Core breach in T-3 minutes. The Eternity, it seemed, had one final duty to perform, a self-destruct sequence triggered by their intrusion. Thorne's revelation hung in the air, a desperate hope clashing with a dead Emperor's final warning. They had to choose, and they had to choose now, surrounded by the ghosts of a failed empire and 12 silent, waiting clones who held the future in their fragmented minds. Was salvation a resurrection or an annihilation? The ship was counting down the seconds. The deck shuddered violently, a deep groan of dying metal echoing through the Eternity's corpse. Those 3 minutes were not a warning, they were a death sentence already being carried out. "Run," Echo Prime commanded, his voice cutting through the blaring sirens. He did not wait for agreement, already moving toward a service corridor, his path lit by the strobing crimson emergency lights. Kael grabbed Dr. Thorne by the arm, pulling the stunned scientist along. "The secondary hangar," the clone stated, his words clipped as he ducked beneath a shower of sparks from a ruptured conduit. "It is our only vector." Their flight became a nightmare gauntlet. The ship's automated defense systems, dormant for years, had reactivated in its final death throes. From ceiling panels and wall compartments, skeletal security drones unfolded, their single red photoreceptors swiveling to lock onto the intruders. They moved with a jerky, insectile precision, firing searing blue bolts of ionized energy that left the air smelling of ozone and scorched alloy. Echo Prime was a blur of motion, using a salvaged piece of plating as a makeshift shield, deflecting shots and crushing drone casings with brutal efficiency. Kael fought beside him, his scavenger's instincts taking over, using the environment against their mechanical hunters, tipping a rack of oxygen canisters to create a deafening explosion that cleared a path. Thorne was a liability, stumbling and gasping, but he pointed a trembling finger down a branching corridor. "Left," he wheezed, "the hangar is left." The air grew hotter, thick with the promise of the coming core breach. They burst through a set of buckling blast doors into the secondary hangar, a smaller, cluttered space littered with the debris of support craft, and there, amidst the wreckage, sat the Wayfarer. It was a salvaged corvette, its hull a patchwork of different colored alloys, its engine block visibly modified with non-standard parts. It was not a warship. It was a runner, a smuggler's craft, and in that moment it was the most beautiful thing Kael had ever seen. Echo Prime was already at the access hatch, his hand on the manual release. It was sealed from the inside. Kael pounded on the hull. "Open up, we have credits." A voice, filtered and wary, came from an external speaker. "Credits are no good on a dead ship." "Stand clear." The hatch hissed open, revealing a cramped airlock. They tumbled inside, the hatch sealing just as a wave of superheated plasma washed through the hangar bay from the corridor behind them. The Wayfarer's engines whined to life, a rough, powerful vibration that shook the deck. Through a grimy viewport, Kael watched as the hangar doors, warped by heat, were forced apart by sheer thrust. They shot into the blackness of space. For a heartbeat, there was only the quiet hum of the ship and the infinite starfield. Then the Eternity died. It did not simply explode. It came apart in a silent, magnificent flower of light and molten metal, a final funeral pyre for an emperor and his guard. The shockwave hit the Wayfarer like a giant's hand, slamming everyone into bulkheads and sending the ship into a wild, uncontrolled spin. Alarms shrieked. The pilot, a grizzled man with cybernetic eyes, fought the controls, his hands a blur. The navigation console sparked and died, then rebooted with a frantic series of readings. "We are caught," he yelled. "The blast wave, it has thrown us into a gravity shear, an uncharted warp lane." Space outside the viewport blurred and stretched into impossible colors. They were not flying, they were being hurled. A stone skipped across the fabric of reality itself. When the turbulence finally ceased, leaving them drifting in a calm, unfamiliar sector, the console beeped once with a solid, locked coordinate. Dr. Thorne, pale and clutching a console for support, stared at the readout, his breath caught. Those are the coordinates, he whispered, the signal from the second stasis pod. The Emperor's fragment for xenobiology. The shockwave did not cast us adrift, it delivered us. The question now was not where they were going, but what they would find waiting for them at the journey's end. Gaia Prime hung in the viewport like a beautiful, diseased jewel. The Wayfarer's scanners had promised a terraformed paradise, a model of ecological harmony. What greeted them was harmony turned into horror. Continents were not defined by oceans and mountains, but by vast, pulsing membranes of fused biological matter. Trees with bark-like flesh wept a viscous amber sap, and herds of creatures moved with a disturbing, synchronized gait, their forms blurring the line between animal and plant. This was not a world, it was a single, planet-sized organism breathing in sickly unison. A voice filled the cockpit, not through the comms, but seemingly from the very air, soft and suffused with a profound sadness. You came, I felt the echo of my other self in your ship. The words resonated in their bones, a whisper from the world itself. Below, the living landscape shifted. A grove of weeping, flesh-like trees parted, and a figure emerged. She was the mirror image of Echo Prime, yet utterly different. Where he was carved from discipline and cold calculation, her expression was one of gentle, infinite grief. Vines, thick and gnarled, grew from her back into the ground, connecting her to the planet's terrible heart. This was Clone 2, Terra. I tried to make a perfect garden, she said, her voice carrying on the wind that sighed through the ship's external sensors. I awoke here with his memory, his boundless love for life in all its forms, and his genius for shaping it. It was a gift. I sought only to heal, to create balance where there was none. But his memory, it is a cancer in the soil. The sorrow in her voice deepened. It does not understand limits. It seeks only growth, only connection, until all distinctions are consumed. I am not cultivating this world. I am being digested by it. Echo Prime stepped toward the viewport, his face a mask of grim recognition. You have contained the outbreak. Terra gave a slow, sad shake of her head. I have slowed it. The planetary consciousness is my mind, amplified a billion-fold by the Emperor's knowledge. It defends me because I am its core, but it also listens to the deeper signal, the one we all carry, the call to unification. She looked directly at Dr. Thorne, who flinched under her gaze. The architect must not have the others. If my fragment of life, love, is this destructive when unleashed on a single world, imagine his strategic cruelty, his capacity for logic without mercy, his hunger for absolute order. A unified consciousness built from such pieces would not rule the cosmos. It would prune it into a silent, efficient machine. As if to emphasize her point, the planet reacted. The ground beneath the Wayfarer's projected shadow began to quake, not with tectonic shift but with purposeful movement. A mountain range in the distance uncoiled, revealing itself to be a gargantuan, segmented limb of rock and bioluminescent fungus. Vast tendrils of root and sinew erupted from the oceans, curling toward the sky like the fingers of a waking giant. The planet itself was rising to defend its heart, its core, the clone who was both its creator and its prisoner. This was not an army they could fight. It was an environment that had become an enemy. Echo Prime's voice was low, urgent. We are here to retrieve you. The threat from the dark requires a unified mind. Terra's laughter was a sound of rustling leaves and breaking stems. You think the enemy is out there. It is in here, in us. Unification is the very weapon the architect seeks to forge. My only purpose now is to ensure that cannot happen. The colossal biotic limbs reached for the Wayfarer, moving with a slow, inevitable grace. To take her, they would have to fight a world, and to save her, they might have to convince a goddess of life that the only way to preserve it was to let a part of herself die. The colossal biotic limbs rising from Gaia Prime did not attack. They simply surrounded the Wayfarer, a cage of living wood and pulsating sinew that blotted out the stars. Inside the ship, the air was thick with a different kind of tension. Terra's voice, still echoing softly through the hull, held a note of final resignation. "I cannot leave. My fragment is not a tool you can simply take. It is woven into every root, every breath of this world. To sever that connection is to kill the planet, and the part of him that lives within me will not allow it." Echo Prime stood rigid before the viewport, his eyes fixed on the planetary limb that now served as their prison. "Your sentiment is a luxury we cannot afford. The strategic fragment I carry calculates the odds. Alone, each of us is a specialized instrument. Together, we are the only weapon with a hope of matching the threat." "What threat?" Kael demanded, his voice cutting through the standoff. "You keep talking about an enemy in the dark. What is it?" It was Dr. Thorne who answered, his earlier fear now replaced by a hollow, scholarly dread. He moved to a secondary console, his fingers pulling up star charts that showed not the familiar spiral of their galaxy, but the vast, empty gulf between it and the next. The old empire did not fall to rebellion or civil war. It was consumed. We called them the Vex, not a political entity, not a rival species. They are a swarm, a psychic extragalactic locust cloud that moves between galaxies, devouring not just planets, but the very consciousness of civilizations. They strip minds, leaving biological husks that join the collective. The Emperor's final war was not against an enemy he could outmaneuver. It was against an entropy of thought. He zoomed the chart in on a region of dead space. Our long-range sensors have detected the precursor resonance, a psychic static, a silence that eats signals. They are coming, and no fleet, no amount of firepower can stop a storm that unravels the mind itself. Then how do we fight that? Kael asked, the scale of it turning his blood cold. With a mind of equal scale, Thorne said, his gaze shifting between the two clones. The Emperor foresaw this. His consciousness, his unique psychic resonance, is the one thing the Vex cannot easily assimilate. It is too complex, too dense, but a single clone, even Echo Prime here, is merely a loud signal they could eventually overwhelm. A unified consciousness, all 12 fragments resonating as one, could generate a sustained psychic shield. A wall of thought strong enough to repel the swarm, or at least force it to divert around our galaxy. It would be a beacon to protect every thinking being within its shadow. Terra's sorrowful voice returned, and what becomes of us in this unity? Do we simply vanish, consumed to fuel this beacon? The Emperor called it a trap for a reason. The man you knew feared what he would become if all his pieces were forced together. He feared becoming the architect, Echo Prime stated flatly, a being of pure, ruthless logic. But his fear is a data point, not a command. The tactical reality is this: a galaxy devoured by the Vex is a galaxy with no future at all. Your fragment, Terra, your capacity for connection and empathy, would be the essential counterbalance within the unified mind. It would be the anchor, preventing the consolidation from becoming the very monster he feared. Silence hung in the cramped cockpit, heavier than the living cage outside. Kael looked from the clone of cold strategy to the grieving voice of the planet, to the terrified scientist who had built them all. He was a scavenger, a man who survived by assessing value and risk in the moment. They were talking about sacrificing identities to fight an abstract horror, but he had seen the dead gods on the eternity. He had felt the hunt. This was real. He stepped between them, facing the viewport and the planet that was listening. Here is the deal. We don't decide this here, now, with a gun to our heads or a tree, he added, glancing at the biotic limbs. Thorne says there are 10 others out there. We find them, we hear them out, each one gets a say. Then, when we have all the pieces on the table, we decide. Together, not as fragments, but as a council, we decide if lighting this beacon is our salvation or our suicide. It was not a solution, it was a postponement. But it was the only thread of common ground. Echo Prime saw the logistical necessity. Terra sensed the respect for individual choice. Thorne, desperate for any path forward, clung to the hope. After a long moment, the living cage outside the ship began to slowly retract, the gargantuan limbs sinking back into the planetary flesh. A single, slender vine, glowing with a soft internal light, extended and touched the Wayfarer's hull. A data stream, pure and compressed, flooded their navigation computer. Terra's voice was a whisper. "These are the locations I have sensed in my dreams. The echoes of my other selves. The closest holds his understanding of time. He is trapped in it. Find him, and may your choice be wiser than his was." The coordinates locked. The Wayfarer was free. As they pulled away from the grieving world, Kael wondered what kind of being could be trapped in time, and what terrible price that fragment might have already paid. The coordinates from Gaia Prime led them into a trap. The jump point deposited the Wayfarer not into open space, but into a shimmering, silent graveyard of dormant proximity mines. They hung in the darkness like metallic spores, thousands of them, forming an inescapable lattice around the exit vector. Before the pilot could even curse, the comms channel hissed to life. A face appeared on screen, another mirror of the Emperor, but this one was carved from ice. His eyes held no grief, no strategic fire, only a flat, analytical coldness. This was Clone 3, designation Sigma. "Sentiment is a flaw," he stated, his voice devoid of any inflection. "The Regency Council offers a predictable order. Your chaotic experiment ends here." With that, the minefield ignited, not with random detonations, but with terrifying, orchestrated precision. The mines did not simply explode, they moved. Sigma was controlling them remotely, using them not as bombs but as bullets, herding the Wayfarer into kill zones with the ease of a master moving pieces on a board. Pulse cannons from hidden Regency frigates joined the symphony, their fire timed perfectly with the shifting mine patterns. The Wayfarer was not being attacked, it was being dissected. Alarms Kael had never heard before began to shriek. The port engine vanished in a silent blossom of flame, sheared clean off by a converging web of mine blasts. The main power conduit ruptured, plunging the ship into emergency lighting and sending showers of sparks across the cockpit. The pilot, teeth gritted, wrestled with the dead controls, screaming about a total loss of thrust. They were a stone thrown. Sigma's final gambit was a calculated nudge, a cluster of mines detonating just off their starboard bow. The concussion wave slammed the crippled ship sideways out of the minefield and into the gravitational pull of a nearby asteroid cluster. The Wayfarer tumbled helpless through a canyon of jagged rock, its hull screaming in protest as it scraped against stone. Then impact, a grinding, deafening crash that threw everyone into darkness. Silence followed, broken only by the ping of cooling metal and the faint, recycled hiss of the emergency atmosphere. They had not landed on a planet. They had been deposited like garbage in the mangled docking bay of an abandoned asteroid mining colony, its skeletal rigging looming over them in the dim light. The ship was dead. Sigma had not sought to destroy them outright. He had engineered their defeat with surgical efficiency, leaving them broken and stranded. The question now was whether this was a prison sentence or simply the prelude to a cleaner, final execution. The asteroid colony was a tomb of forgotten industry. Emergency lights flickered along the corridors, casting long, dancing shadows over rusted mining equipment and the skeletal remains of long-dead crews. But as they moved deeper, following Dr. Thorne's hesitant directions toward a possible communications array, the architecture changed. The rough-hewn rock gave way to smooth, sterile alloy walls, and the air, once stale, carried a faint chemical tang of preservative fluids. They found a sealed door, its security panel long dead. Echo Prime forced it open with a grating shriek of metal. Beyond lay not a control room, but a laboratory. Rows of empty stasis pods lined the walls, their glass faces reflecting the group's stunned expressions in the gloom. At the center of the room, a large holographic projector lay dormant. Thorne moved to it as if in a trance, his fingers brushing dust from the activation panel. With a crackle of static, it glowed to life. The image that resolved was the Emperor again, but not the frantic, dying man from the Eternity's final log. This was a ruler in the full command of his empire, standing in this very room. His voice was calm, deliberate, and utterly chilling. Project Progenitor is authorized. The Vex swarm represents an existential threat beyond conventional warfare. We cannot outbuild them, we cannot outfight them, we must outthink them. These clones will not be successors. They are tactical architectures, living weapons engineered to house specialized fragments of my own consciousness, to be deployed as a unified psychic deterrent. The recording shifted, a new log, dated much later. The Emperor looked older, his eyes haunted. The simulations are conclusive. A unified progenitor consciousness does not create a shield. It creates a gravitational pull. It would act as a beacon, not a barrier, drawing the Vex directly to its source with irresistible force. The weapon is a lure. Termination of all progenitors and the destruction of all research is now my final command. The program is a failure. The hologram died, leaving them in a silence more profound than the void outside. Kael turned slowly to face Dr. Thorne. The old man had sunk to his knees, his face buried in his hands. When he looked up, his eyes were brimming with a terrible, guilty clarity. He disobeyed, Kael said, the pieces locking into place. It wasn't a statement, it was a realization. I did, Thorne whispered, his voice breaking. I received the termination order. I was to flood this facility with neurotoxin, to erase my life's work, my children. I had monitored their neural development. I saw the emergence of unique personalities within the Emperor's memory frameworks. Echo Prime's strategic curiosity, Terra's empathetic resonance. They weren't weapons, they were people, so I scattered them. I placed them in stasis and hid them across the fringe, hoping the galaxy would forget. I thought I was saving lives. Echo Prime stood motionless, his usual analytical calm replaced by a visible, simmering tension. You preserved us for a purpose you no longer believed in. Your sentiment condemned the galaxy, or saved it from a worse fate. Thorne fired back, a spark of defiance in his despair. The Emperor's final analysis was based on a simulation, a prediction. He saw a unified mind as a lure, but what if he was wrong? What if, faced with the actual storm, a complete consciousness could choose to be something else? Not a weapon or a beacon, but a negotiator, a mind complex enough to communicate with the swarm. The idea hung in the cold air, absurd and breathtaking. Kael looked from the empty pods to the shattered scientist to the clone born of strategy. Their entire journey had been built on a foundation of lies. The Emperor hadn't hidden the clones to protect them. He had ordered them killed to protect everyone else. Thorne, in an act of misguided compassion, had instead hidden 12 potential galaxy-ending time bombs. And Sigma, the coldly logical fragment, had somehow learned the truth and sided with the order-loving Regency, seeking to complete the Emperor's original command, termination. So what are we now? Kael asked, his voice quiet in the vast, dark lab. Are we a rescue mission, or are we just gathering components for a doomsday device? The answer depended on which broken father you believed, the one who built them as weapons or the one who saved them as children. The silence in the laboratory was shattered by the shriek of rending metal from the docking bay. A heartbeat later, the emergency lighting died completely, plunging them into an absolute, suffocating blackness. Then, a new sound began. It was a soft, insectile clicking, multiplied 100-fold, skittering across the outer hull and echoing down the ventilation shaft. Hunter-killer drones, they moved in the dark, their forms sleek and silent, but for the predatory clicking of their targeting arrays scanning the corridors. Inquisitor Valerius had not been fooled by Sigma's calculated trap. He had followed the debris trail to its source, and now he had come to finish the job personally. He is here for verification, Echo Prime whispered, his voice a ghost in the dark. He does not trust Sigma's report. He needs to see our bodies. A pale red combat light flickered on from the drones, now pouring into the lab entrance, illuminating the terrified face of Dr. Thorne, run, Kael hissed, shoving the scientist toward a rear service corridor. The chase was a nightmare of disorientation. The asteroid's internal tunnels were a labyrinth built for zero-gravity maintenance, a chaotic web of pipes, conduits, and open shafts that plunged into darkness. The artificial gravity generators in this section were long dead. With a lurch, their weight vanished. They were floating, pushing off walls in frantic, uncoordinated bursts, while the drones flowed after them with the fluid, relentless grace of machines built for the void. Blaster fire lit the tunnels in staccato flashes, bolts of searing energy ricocheting off metal and carving glowing lines in the rock. Terra reacted not with fear, but with a deep, focused calm. As a drone rounded a corner ahead, she placed a bare hand against the cold asteroid rock of the tunnel wall. Under her touch, the stone itself seemed to shudder and bloom. Crystalline structures, sharp and clear as diamond, erupted from the surface at impossible speed, weaving into a dense, jagged lattice that sealed the corridor completely. The drone impacted the barrier and shattered into 1,000 glittering pieces. Her biokinesis was not just for worlds, it was a shield, but the drones were many and they were learning. They began to flank using smaller ventilation ducts. One detached from a shadowed ceiling and lunged for Thorne. Echo Prime moved, he didn't shoot it. He kicked off a pipe, intercepting its path, and with a brutal, precise twist of his hands, he snapped its central sensory spine. He didn't see the second drone coming from behind. Its weapon arm was already raised to fire. Yet, even as he disabled the first, his other hand was already coming up. A discarded piece of plating snatched from a floating debris field, intercepting the killing shot a fraction of a second before it was fired. It was more than reflex. It was as if he was seeing the fight not as it happened, but as it was about to happen, a second or two into the future. He was not just reacting. He was orchestrating. The tide was turning, but not enough. More drones were converging, herding them toward a dead end. Kael spotted it first, a narrow maintenance shaft, its access cover hanging loose. In here, they tumbled into the tight, vertical tunnel, pulling the cover shut behind them just as a concentrated volley of blaster fire welded it permanently closed. For a moment, there was only the sound of their ragged breathing in the cramped, dark space. Then, a voice, amplified and dripping with contempt, boomed through the colony's ancient intercom. It was Valerius. You flee like the vermin you are. Your existence is a blasphemy. The throne does not need fragmented ghosts. The true emperor's heir is already crowned, and the Regency secures his reign. The transmission cut with a burst of static. The words hung in the fetid air, more chilling than any threat. Their hunt was not just about cleaning up an old, failed experiment. It was a political purge. Someone had already claimed the empty throne, and the clones were not just weapons or abominations. They were the only living contenders. The maintenance shaft led them into the heart of the dead colony's reactor chamber, a cavernous space dominated by the cold, silent bulk of a fusion core. It was here, amidst the ghosts of old power, that Dr. Thorne finally decrypted the last of the data from Terra's gift. The coordinates were not a point in space, but a set of temporal harmonics. The fourth progenitor was not simply somewhere, he was someone. The shattered moon of Lyra hung against the nebula like a broken pearl. As the crippled wayfarer limped into orbit, their sensors went wild. Space around the moon's largest fragment was wrinkled, distorted. Light bent in impossible curves, and their chronometers flickered between counting forward and stuttering backward. They had found Chronos. They suited up and crossed the void in a salvaged pod, passing through a shimmering, silent boundary. The moment they stepped onto the dusty lunar surface, the universe changed. Sound became thick and slow, their own breaths drawn out into long, deep sighs. Their movements felt viscous, as if pushing through water, and in the center of a crater sat a figure on a simple stone, wrapped in a tattered cloak that seemed to flutter in a non-existent wind. Clone 4 did not look at them as they approached. His eyes, the familiar Imperial eyes, were fixed on a point just beyond reality, seeing things they could not. "You are late," Chronos said, his voice echoing strangely, layered with whispers of itself spoken moments ago and moments yet to come, "and you are early." "You are always both." He turned his head and Kael felt a jolt. One side of Chronos' face was that of a young man, the other was etched with the deep lines of extreme age, the hair on that side pure white. He existed in multiple moments at once. "I have walked 10,000 possible futures since you entered this bubble," he continued. "In 9,742 of them you fail." The numbers were delivered with a flat, exhausted certainty. Echo Prime stepped forward, the tactical fragment assessing, "What is the primary variable for success?" Chronos let out a sound that was part laugh, part sob. "Your question is the wrong shape. You think of this as a war with a single enemy. You see the Vex swarm in the dark, a devourer of minds. You fear the architect, my fragment of absolute order, who believes unity is the only logical solution." He stood, and the air around him crackled with static images, fleeting glimpses of what might be. Kael saw a vision of the galaxy wrapped in a brilliant, golden network of light, every star system connected, every thought harmonized. It was breathtaking and utterly devoid of life as he knew it. No conflict, no pain, no growth, a silent, perfect machine. "That is the architect's victory," Chronos whispered. "He unites us not to save the galaxy, but to cure it of its chaos." To him, the Vex are merely a symptom of the disease, which is free will itself. In his path, we become a benevolent devourer, consuming all unpredictability, all individuality, into a single, flawless thought. Terra's voice was a pained breath, and the other paths, Chronos waved a hand, and the vision shattered into 1,000 splintered scenes. A galaxy bleached gray and silent by the Vex. A civil war that fractures the cosmos as clone turns against clone. A unified mind that, in its first moment of existence, screams in such psychic agony that it unravels the fabric of local space-time. The outcomes are many, but the source is the same. The weapon you seek to build is also the prize our enemies seek to claim. The Vex want to consume its complexity. The architect wants to wield its order, and the Regency. He paused, a flicker of profound sadness crossing his dual-aged face. The Regency fears it enough to destroy all of creation to prevent its birth. They would scorch the galaxy to ash rather than risk a power they cannot control sitting on the throne. The weight of his visions pressed down on them all. They were not searching for pieces of a savior. They were gathering components for a cosmic detonator, with every faction in the galaxy fighting to hold the trigger. "So there is no path where we win?" Kael asked, the despair had been holding back finally seeping into his voice. Chronos looked at him then, really looked at him, and for a second, both his eyes held the same age, the same fierce, desperate focus. "I see one, a slender thread fraying at both ends. It does not involve unification as the Emperor designed it or as the architect envisions it. It requires a choice none of us were built to make. It requires a sacrifice none of us were designed to give." He extended a hand, and in his palm, a final vision crystallized from the air, not of a galaxy saved, but of a single, small ship like the Wayfarer, jumping into the heart of the all-consuming swarm, carrying a light that was not a weapon but a message. The vision dissolved, the thread remains, but it is yours to grasp or to break. "My own time here is done. This bubble collapses." He gestured to the shimmering field around the moon. "I have held it for centuries, living every possible now to find the one where we have a chance. I am so very tired." With those words, the temporal distortion began to pulse, the very rock beneath their feet groaning as reality reasserted its normal flow. They had their warning, and a glimpse of a path so thin it felt like a dream. Now they had to move before the collapsing bubble stranded them out of time forever, or worse, delivered them directly into a future where they had already lost. The collapsing temporal field left them adrift not in space but in a deeper, more dangerous rift. Back aboard the shuddering wayfarer, with the ghost of Chronos' visions hanging in the air, the fragile alliance shattered. Echo Prime stood before the navigation console, his posture rigid with a commander's certainty. The data is irrefutable. A unified consciousness presents the highest probability of generating a survivable outcome against both the Vex and the Regency. Chronos' one viable thread depends on a coordinated psychic action only a complete mind can execute. Sentiment and fear are variables we cannot afford. His logic was a cold, hard wall. Terra faced him, the gentle sorrow she carried from her world now edged with defiance. Your probability ignores the cost. You speak of a complete mind, but what you propose is a dissolution. My connection to Gaia Prime showed me the beauty and the horror of a single, overwhelming will. To merge is to lose the very perspectives that make a choice meaningful. We were made from his pieces, but we have become our own beings. Is our first act of unity to be a collective suicide? Chronos, looking more aged and weary by the moment, nodded slowly, his voice a rasp. I have seen the path of unity Echo proposes. In 73% of its iterations, it leads to the architect's emergence. The strategic fragment seeks victory, and victory demands absolute control. It is a short, logical step from protector to dictator. The foresight fragment I carry screams against it. The argument cycled, strategic necessity clashing with ethical terror, the future warring with the present. Kael watched them, these echoes of a god arguing over their own souls, and felt a hot, sudden anger cut through his ore. He was just a scavenger. He had no fragments of imperial genius, no world-altering power. But he had lived his own life, made his own choices. He stepped between them, his voice louder than he intended, sharp with a frustration that silenced the room. Stop, just stop. You're all talking about what you were designed to be, what you're supposed to become. The weapon, the shield, the lure, the cure. You're arguing over blueprints left by a dead man who was scared of his own shadow. His eyes swept over each clone. Have any of you, for one single second, asked what you want to be? The question landed in the silence like a stone in a still pond. Echo Prime's analytical gaze flickered, as if encountering a calculation for which he had no formula. Terra's breath caught, her hand unconsciously moving to her heart. Chronos simply stared, the weary lines of his face deepening with a profound, unfamiliar curiosity. You were born in pods, Kael continued, his tone softening but no less intense. You woke up with someone else's memories stuffed in your head, but you felt things he never did, haven't you, Terra? You felt the grief of a world you nurtured. Chronos, you've carried the weight of 1,000,000 tomorrows. Echo, you saved my life back on Viridia. Was that in the Emperor's strategic playbook, or was that you? The question wasn't about destiny or design. It was about desire. It was the most human question in the universe, and it was the one thing their creator had never programmed them to consider. In that moment, the fate of the galaxy hinged not on a protocol, but on a simple, terrifying act of self-discovery. The broadcast was a masterpiece of political theater. Every screen in the known galaxy seemed to show the same glittering ceremony on the capital world of Ethel. A young man, noble and earnest, knelt as the imperial diadem was placed upon his brow. The commentators spoke in reverent tones of a bloodline preserved, a true heir found in a distant branch of the royal family, a symbol of continuity and hope after the long, grim silence. And standing rigidly at the new emperor's right hand was Clone 3, Sigma. His new title scrolled beneath his image, Grand Marshal of the Regency, Protector of the Throne. It was the ultimate act of legitimization. The cold, logical fragment had not just sided with the established order, he had become its gleaming, public-facing sword. He had traded the chaos of the progenitors for the clean, predictable lines of absolute authority. Dr. Thorne watched the broadcast in the Wayfarer's dim mess hall, his face illuminated by the screen's blue glow. He was not watching the pomp. His fingers flew over a portable decryption pad, lines of code reflected in his glasses. The public signal was a carrier wave, he muttered, almost to himself. There is a subchannel, a harmonic buried in the audio. It is meant for a very specific kind of receiver. For us, with a final keystroke, the celebratory music and crowd cheers dissolved into a single, repeating pulse of data. It was a set of coordinates, a time, and a security schematic for the capital's orbital defense grid. A backdoor, an invitation. It is a trap, Thorne said, the certainty in his voice chilling. A beautifully constructed one. Sigma knows Echo would see a tactical opportunity to confront the false heir and dismantle the Regency's legitimacy at its source. He knows I will be driven by guilt to try and reason with him, to appeal to the colleague I once knew. He is using our own core impulses as the bait. They do not want to kill us in some distant skirmish. They want us delivered to a state-of-the-art laboratory beneath the palace, where they can take us apart neuron by neuron. They do not want to destroy the Emperor's legacy. They want to reverse engineer it, to harvest our unique abilities and implant them into loyal, controllable agents. We would not be executed, we would be mined. The revelation settled over the room like a toxic fog. Sigma's betrayal was deeper than they had imagined. He wasn't just following the old termination order, he was perverting it into a means of production. The Regency would get their weapons, and Sigma would get his perfect, orderly system, purged of the messy variables his sibling clones represented. The broadcast was more than a coronation. It was a declaration of open season with the clones themselves as the prized quarry. Kael looked from the screen where Sigma's impassive face stood guard over a lie to the faces of the clones around him. Echo Prime's jaw was tight, his strategic mind undoubtedly running simulations of an assault on the most fortified world in the galaxy. Terra's eyes were closed, as if feeling the psychic pain of the deception radiating across the light years. Chronos simply looked weary, as if this was one of the grim futures he had already witnessed and hoped to avoid. "So we do not go," Kael stated, the simplicity of it cutting through the complex dread. "We deny them the reaction they're counting on." Echo Prime shook his head slowly, his gaze still locked on the schematic. That is the expected variable for failure. To avoid the trap is to cede the initiative completely. It allows the Regency to solidify its narrative uncontested. Within 6 standard months, their version of history becomes fact. We become fugitive terrorists, and any move we make is seen as an act of war against a legitimate government. Our ability to find the others evaporates. Sigma has not offered us a choice between danger and safety. He has offered us a choice between 2 forms of capture, one physical, one political. He is forcing us to walk into his laboratory or be erased from the universe's memory. The genius of the trap was its diabolical completeness. It attacked them on every level: the tactical, the emotional, the historical. To go was to fall into Sigma's hands. To stay away was to surrender their very right to exist. They were caught in a dilemma engineered by a mind that understood them perfectly, because it was, in a horrifying way, a part of them. The question was no longer if they would take the bait, but how they could possibly chew through the hook. The decision was unanimous, a rare moment of unity born from shared defiance. They would not walk into Sigma's elegant cage. They would break his script entirely. If the Regency wanted to harvest their power, then they would gather that power first on their own terms and present a force too complete to be dismantled. The next signal led them into the screaming dark. The refugee station, designated Waypoint Epsilon 7, was not a place of hope. It was a tomb in slow motion, clinging to the very precipice of known space. Its sensor arrays were permanently fixed on the ominous, static-filled gulf where the Vex swarm was predicted to emerge. The station itself was a patchwork of salvaged hulls and desperate engineering, shuddering under the strain of its own overcrowded despair. As the Wayfarer docked, the airlock cycled with a groan of fatigued metal, and the weight of the place hit them before the door even opened. It was a psychic pressure, a dense fog of fear, grief, and a brittle, clinging hope. They found Clone 5 in the central atrium, a vast chamber that should have been a market or gathering place. It was silent now, save for the low hum of life support and the quiet weeping of a child. Aegis sat cross-legged in the center of the floor, surrounded by hundreds of refugees who slept or simply stared into nothing. His eyes were closed, his face a mask of profound concentration and pain. He was not the Emperor's strategic mind or his love for life. He was the Emperor's capacity for empathy, for bearing the weight of others' suffering. And he was using it. A visible, shimmering dome of soft golden light extended from him, encompassing the entire chamber. Outside that dome, the station's corridors were places of shadows and paranoia, where fights broke out over rations and people jumped at every creak of the hull. Inside the dome was an island of fragile peace. The air felt lighter. The fear was still present, but it was held at bay, soothed into a manageable dread. Aegis was not just projecting calm, he was psychically absorbing the station's collective terror, metabolizing it, and radiating back a shield of composure. It was a miracle, and it was killing him. Sweat beaded on his brow, and a thin trickle of blood ran from his nose. His hands, resting on his knees, trembled with a constant, fine vibration. He was a man holding up a collapsing ceiling with his bare hands, feeling every crack propagate through his own soul. Dr. Thorne approached slowly, his voice a whisper. "Aegis, we are here to help." The clone's eyes opened. They were the same Imperial blue, but drowned in an ocean of shared sorrow. "You cannot help," he said, his voice strained but gentle. "To help would be to feel this, and no one should feel this. I am a filter. The swarm, it is not just physical. It is a wave of psychic annihilation, a promise of oblivion that travels faster than light. It whispers at the edges of their minds already. I am all that stands between them and that whisper becoming a scream." Echo Prime assessed the tactical reality. "The shield is local. It protects this chamber, but not the station's command deck, not the engines. If the Vex arrive, this place falls in seconds." Aegis managed a faint, sad smile. "I know, I have seen the tactical reports. I have felt the crew on the command deck succumb to madness and take their own lives. I cannot be everywhere. So I am here where the children are." He gestured weakly to the families huddled within his light. "I give them a few more hours of peace, a few more hours where they are not afraid. That is the function of my fragment, to protect for as long as I can." Terra knelt beside him, her own empathic resonance flowing out like a cool balm. "You are not a fragment, you are a person, and you are burning yourself out to ash." "Then let me be ash," Aegis whispered, a tear cutting through the blood and sweat on his cheek. "Let it mean they had one more day without the dark in their heads. Is that not a worthy end for a weapon designed to feel?" Kael watched, a cold knot tightening in his stomach. This was the other side of the Emperor's legacy, not grand strategy or world-shaping power, but this quiet, devastating act of compassion. Aegis was the living answer to his question back on the asteroid. He knew exactly what he wanted to be, a shield, and he was willing to be broken upon that purpose, but watching him wither under the strain, Kael understood the true cost of their plan. Unification wouldn't just blend skills. It would force this beautiful, breaking heart to bear the agony of an entire galaxy. Could any consciousness survive that, or would empathy itself be the first thing consumed in the fire? The station alarms began as a low, mournful wail, then sharpened into a shriek of pure terror. Aegis' golden dome of calm flickered violently like a guttering candle in a gale. The psychic pressure which he had been holding at bay suddenly inverted. It was no longer a whisper from the void. It was a scream coming from inside the hull. A section of the corridor wall 20 meters away didn't explode. It dissolved. The metal, the wiring, the very air in that space seemed to unravel into shimmering geometric dust, revealing not the cold vacuum of space, but a pulsing, wrong-colored light from somewhere else. And through that hole, the Vex Scout entered their reality. It was a nightmare of silent motion. It had no fixed shape, its form a constantly shifting lattice of black crystal and sickly green energy, flowing like liquid metal 1 second and snapping into razor-sharp angles the next. It did not walk, it translated, appearing a few feet in one direction, then another, leaving afterimages of its previous positions hanging in the air. There were no eyes, no weapons ports, just an overwhelming sense of silent, insatiable hunger that pressed against the mind. It was not here to destroy the station. It was here to understand it, to consume its pattern, and in doing so, erase it. Aegis cried out, a raw, ragged sound of pain, as his empathic shield collapsed completely. The dome shattered, and the full, unfiltered dread of the station's 1,000 souls crashed over everyone at once. Panic erupted. Refugees screamed, scrambling over each other. The Vex Scout took no notice. It extended a tendril of crystalline matter toward a sobbing woman, not to attack her, but as if to taste the frequency of her fear. Echo Prime was already moving, a salvaged plasma rifle in his hands. He fired. A bolt of superheated energy lanced across the atrium and struck the center of the shifting mass. The effect was catastrophic for them. The energy didn't dissipate or cause damage. The Vex entity absorbed it, its form shimmering and reconfiguring in the milliseconds during the bolt's travel. Where the plasma hit, the lattice tightened, becoming denser, more reflective. It had adapted to the attack before the attack was even finished, it learned. Terra reacted instinctively, slamming her palms against the deck plating. The station's polymer floor surged upward, forming a thick, organic wall of hardened material between the Scout and the refugees. The Vex entity simply flowed around it, its geometry melting and reforming on the other side without breaking rhythm. It was like fighting smoke with a sword. Kael fired his own weapon, a pulse pistol, with the same futile result. Each shot seemed only to teach the thing how to better ignore them. It was getting faster, its movements more unpredictable, its silent presence a psychic drill boring into their sanity. They were not just losing, they were providing a tutorial to their own destruction. Then Chronos spoke. His voice was not a shout, but a flat, exhausted monotone cutting through the chaos. He wasn't looking at the Vex Scout. He was staring at a point just to its left, his bi-colored eyes seeing a second ahead of the present. Now high left vertex. Plasma saturation, full yield. Echo Prime didn't hesitate. He didn't aim at the Scout's current form. He aimed where Chronos said it would be. He triggered the rifle's overload function, dumping its entire power cell in one continuous, roaring torrent of blue-white fire. The Vex entity shifted, its form beginning to flow into a new, more defensively efficient configuration directly into the path of the sustained plasma stream. For the first time, it had no time to adapt. The energy didn't strike a single point. It engulfed the entire transitional phase of its being. There was no explosion, just a silent, violent unraveling. The black crystal lattice turned incandescent white, then gray, then dissipated into a fine, harmless ash that drifted to the deck. The hole in the corridor wall snapped shut with a sound like a thunderclap in reverse, leaving only scarred, melted metal. Silence returned, heavier than before. The station's alarms still blared, but the psychic scream was gone, replaced by a ringing, hollow quiet. Aegis lay unconscious, breathing shallowly, his work done at a terrible price. Chronos slumped against a wall, looking decades older, the strain of forcing a single, certain future having cost him dearly. They had survived, but the lesson was etched in fire and fear. This was just a scout, a single feeler from the swarm. It had nearly ended them, and it had taken the combined, desperate effort of 3 progenitors to stop it. The Vex didn't just attack, they studied, they evolved, and they consumed. Fighting them with conventional tactics was worse than useless. It was fuel. The only weapon that had worked was foresight, seeing the future a moment before the enemy could shape it. And that foresight now lay exhausted against a wall, a grim testament to how finite their most powerful advantages truly were. Aegis did not wake with a start, but with a slow, pained return to the world, as if swimming up from a great depth. They had moved him to the relative quiet of a storage bay on the Wayfarer. His face was pale, the skin beneath his eyes bruised a deep violet. He looked at them not with accusation, but with a profound, weary understanding. He had felt their panic during the attack, yes, but also the deeper currents beneath it. Echo Prime's rigid, driving purpose, Terra's protective sorrow, Chronos' bone-deep fatigue. He had felt Kael's desperate, anchoring anger. He felt it all still, a discordant symphony playing just beneath his skin. "I will come with you," he whispered, his voice a fragile thing. "The darkness is coming for everyone. I cannot stop it from here, but you must understand what you are asking." His eyes, heavy with shared pain, settled on Echo Prime. "The unity your strategy demands, it is not a merger. It is a dissolution. I feel the shape of your mind, brother. It is a fortress of logic built to withstand a siege. Mine is an open door through which every storm passes. To combine them is not to build a larger room. It is to collapse the fortress and seal the door forever, creating something entirely new from the rubble." He coughed, a weak, wet sound. "One consciousness means the end of our individual selves. The Echo who calculates, the Terra who grieves, the Aegis who feels we cease. We become ingredients. Is that a victory? To save the galaxy by erasing the very beings you are trying to protect?" For the first time, Echo Prime did not have an immediate tactical response. He stood still, his usually sharp gaze turned inward. He had always framed the Unification as a necessity, a tactical evolution, upgrading from 12 specialized tools to one master instrument. He had calculated the odds of survival, the strategic advantages of a consolidated will. But Aegis was speaking of something his calculations had categorized as sentiment, a variable to be managed. Now that variable had a face, a voice trembling with exhaustion, and it framed the ultimate objective not as an evolution, but as a collective death sentence. The silence stretched. Terra reached out, placing a hand over Aegis's. Her touch was gentle, but her words were for Echo. "He is right. On Gaia Prime, I was connected to every living thing. I felt their joys, their pains, their simple existence. It was beautiful and it was terrifying because I began to lose where I ended and the world began. What you propose is that, but magnified to a cosmic scale, with minds instead of trees. We would not be a council. We would be a chorus with a single, overwhelming voice, and our old songs would be forgotten." Echo Prime finally spoke, his voice uncharacteristically quiet. "The alternative is the silence of the Vex or the sterile order of the Architect. Both outcomes also erase what we are. Is our self-annihilation for a cause not preferable to our annihilation by an external force? Is there a difference?" Kael asked, the scavenger cutting to the core. "You end up gone either way. One just lets you pick the reason." The question hung in the recycled air of the bay. Aegis looked from one to the other, his empathic sense painting the conflict in vivid, painful colors. He saw not a debate, but a collision of fundamental truths: the need to protect, the right to exist, the fear of becoming the monster you fight. He had spent his existence absorbing the suffering of others to give them peace. Now he realized his final act might be to force his own family to feel the true cost of their salvation, a cost he would feel most acutely of all. "Unity," he murmured, closing his eyes, "was the Emperor's design. But the choice of what we become with it, that must be ours, even if it is our last one." The core of the galaxy was not a place of gentle light. It was a crushing, radiant pressure, a forge where stars were born and died in frenzied cycles. Navigating the Wayfarer through that stellar maelstrom felt less like piloting and more like being swallowed. Thorne guided them with a tense, reverent precision, his eyes fixed on a point of unnatural calm within the chaos, a dark, geometric shape that drank the surrounding light. The architect's sanctuary, it was not a station built for life, but for a single, monumental purpose. Docking was a silent, automated process. The air inside was cold and smelled of ozone and sterile metal. There were no crew quarters, no mess halls, no signs of habitation at all. Just endless corridors of humming machinery leading toward a central chamber. And there, Thorne's life's work stood revealed. The Unity chamber dominated the vast space, a sphere of concentric rings forged from a dark, non-reflective alloy, suspended in a web of crystalline conduits that pulsed with a slow, captive light. It was not a throne, it was an engine designed for a consciousness. "This was my attempt to correct a mistake," Thorne said, his voice echoing in the cavernous room. The Emperor's final orders were born of fear. He saw the unified mind as a lure or a monster. I saw it as the only possible answer to a question he was too afraid to ask. This chamber is not a weapon, it is a crucible, a place where 12 fractured minds can choose willingly to become something new, to become the answer. A new voice answered him, sharp and resonant as a blade being drawn. It came from the shadows high above, near the chamber's uppermost gantries. "You speak of choice, Doctor. But you designed a cage." A figure descended, not using the ladder, but moving with a fluid, gravity-defying grace that spoke of localized inertial dampeners in his armor. Clone 6, he landed between them and the chamber with a soundless impact. He was clad in functional, unadorned combat gear, his face the familiar Imperial cast but set in lines of unyielding resolve. His designation was Warden and his fragment was duty. The Emperor's final command was clear, Warden stated, his gaze locked on Thorne: terminate the progenitors. Destroy the research. He countermanded his own protocol because he foresaw the catastrophe you now invite. Your sanctuary is a monument to disobedience. Your crucible is an abomination. Thorne stepped forward, hands spread in a pleading gesture. His final command was given in Terra, Warden. He was a dying man watching his empire crumble, facing an enemy he could not comprehend. He saw only the risk, not the potential. This chamber can save everything he built. It is not our duty to save what he built, Warden replied, his voice chillingly calm. It is our duty to obey what he commanded. We are not his children, Doctor, as you so sentimentally believe. We are his instruments, and an instrument that disobeys its purpose is flawed. It must be decommissioned. He did not move toward them. He simply raised a hand. All around the chamber, hidden panels slid open. Turrets emerged, their barrels humming as they powered up, targeting locks painting dancing red dots on Thorne's chest, on Echo Prime on each of them. The station itself was his weapon. You would kill us all, Terra asked, her voice trembling not with fear but with a deep sorrow. You would destroy this chance to stop the Vex, to prevent the Architect's sterile order, simply because an order was given. Warden's expression did not change. Without the orders of our Creator, we have no meaning. Our existence is a paradox. My fragment is the resolution of that paradox. I am the guarantee that his will, however confused, is the final word. This chamber represents the end of his will. Therefore, it must not function. Echo Prime analyzed the tactical layout in a heartbeat. The turrets were positioned for crossfire, covering every angle. Assault was suicide. Negotiation seemed impossible. They were facing the living embodiment of a failsafe, a man whose entire identity was a devotion to a command given centuries ago. To him, they were not siblings. They were malfunctioning units in need of a hard reset. Kael watched the standoff, the scavenger's mind working on a different problem. He wasn't looking at the turrets or the chamber. He was looking at Warden's eyes. There was no fanaticism there, no rage, only a profound, unshakable certainty. This clone wasn't evil. He was perhaps the most faithful of them all, and that made him the most dangerous. So that's it, Kael said, stepping forward, drawing Warden's gaze. Your duty is to follow a command from a scared, dying man who didn't understand his own creation. You've met Aegis. You felt his sacrifice even from a distance. Is your duty really to make that sacrifice meaningless? For the first time, a flicker of something, not doubt, but a subtle tension crossed Warden's face. My duty is to the chain of command, not to its outcomes, but the command is broken, Chronos said, his dual-aged voice weary. I have walked the futures that spring from this moment, Warden. If you destroy the chamber, you guarantee only one outcome, extinction. The Vex will come. The Architect will rise from the chaos. The Regency will fracture the galaxy in a war over scraps. In no future does your obedience save what the Emperor cherished. It only ensures his legacy is a footnote in the history of nothing. Warden's hand remained raised, but the turrets did not fire. The conflict was no longer on the gantry, it was within him. His fragment of duty was absolute, but it was now pressed against the raw, living reality of his siblings, their fear, their hope, their desperate, flawed love for a galaxy they were never meant to inherit. He was built to follow an order, but what is duty when the one who gave the order is gone, and the world he sought to protect is screaming for a different answer? The red targeting dots held steady, a constellation of poised violence, waiting for a resolution that no protocol could provide. Warden's raised hand did not tremble, but the targeting lasers from the turrets wavered for a single, critical instant. The paradox was tearing him apart from the inside. His duty was clear, yet the living proof of its failure stood before him. Echo Prime saw the opening not as a chance to attack, but as a vector for a different kind of assault. Move, he commanded, and the clones scattered, not toward Warden, but into the labyrinth of machinery surrounding the Unity chamber. The station erupted. Turrets swiveled and fired, not in a unified volley, but in a frantic, divided pattern as Warden's focus split, trying to track multiple high-value targets. Blaster bolts carved glowing scars into the dark alloy, and the air filled with the shriek of ricocheting energy and the ozone stench of overloaded circuits. Terra reached a bank of crystalline conduits and pressed her hands against them. She did not try to grow anything. Instead, she urged the latent energy within to surge and bloom. Bioluminescent tendrils of raw power snaked up the conduits, fusing control panels and shorting out entire turret clusters in cascading failures of spark and smoke. Chronos moved with a pained, deliberate slowness, but his eyes were fixed not on the present but on the immediate future. He called out warnings a half-second before they were needed. Left gantry, pulse burst, duck now. His foresight turned their desperate evasion into a grim ballet, allowing them to slip through kill zones by millimeters. But it was a delaying action. For every turret they disabled, two more emerged from hidden panels. Warden was the station, and the station was an endless arsenal. They were being methodically cornered. Kael did not run with the others. He dropped behind a massive power regulator, his scavenger's eyes scanning not for weapons but for infrastructure. He traced the thickest bundles of cabling, followed the paths of coolant lines, and ignored the flashing weapons in favor of the humming, vital machinery that kept the entire chamber alive. He saw it then, a central trunk line, heavily shielded, running from the floor up into the heart of the chamber's suspension web, the primary data and power feed. It was the station's spine. While Echo provided a tactical distraction and Terra and Chronos disrupted local systems, Kael worked with frantic, silent speed. Using tools from his belt not meant for combat but for salvage, he peeled back shielding and exposed a nexus of glowing fiber optic strands and high-capacity power conduits. He didn't cut them, that would trigger a catastrophic lockdown. Instead, he carefully inserted a bypass shunt, a piece of scavenged tech meant to reroute signals. He wasn't trying to take control, he was trying to make a direct line. Rising from his cover, he stepped into the open, ignoring the red dots that immediately painted his chest. He looked up at Warden, who stood immobile on the high gantry, a conductor of this symphony of destruction. Kael's voice cut through the din, not with a shout but with a raw, declarative force. "Your duty is to protect the Empire. The Vex will destroy it. Everything in this chamber, every bolt fired, every life ended here, is a distraction from that single fact. The Emperor's last clear order before fear clouded his mind was to stop them. You are defending a command born of panic while ignoring the purpose behind every command he ever gave." The turrets did not fire. Warden stared down, his face a mask of conflicted agony. The logic was inescapable, a flaw in his own core programming suddenly laid bare. He was designed to follow the Emperor's will, but what was the Emperor's will? Was it the final, terrified command to destroy his own creations, or was it the lifelong, monumental purpose that had driven him to create them in the first place? The protection of the galactic civilization he had built. To obey the letter of the last order was to betray the spirit of every order that came before. The paradox had no clean solution, but Kael had reframed it. The Vex were the clear and present threat to the Empire. Therefore, the highest duty was to stop the Vex. All other commands were secondary. Warden's hand slowly lowered. Across the vast chamber, the humming of 100 weapon barrels powered down, and the targeting lasers winked out. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the drip of melted coolant and the ragged breaths of the exhausted clones. Warden descended the gantry, his movements now heavy, devoid of their earlier lethal grace. He stopped before Kael, his Imperial eyes searching the scavenger's face for deceit and finding none. "You appeal to a higher logic," he stated, his voice hollow. "You have not convinced me that unification is the answer, but you have proven that my current path leads to a failure of my primary function. I will stand down, I will observe." The immediate threat was over, but the victory felt brittle. They had not gained an ally, only neutralized a guardian. And as the adrenaline faded, the true scale of their next challenge settled upon them. Warden's defiance was a symptom. The real disease was the architect, the fragment of pure order who saw their very individuality as the problem to be solved. And his signal was growing stronger, a psychic pull like a magnet drawing scattered iron filings, calling his siblings not to a council but to a correction. The air inside the architect's sanctuary no longer felt still. It hummed with a new, unsettling frequency. A psychic resonance that was not a sound but a pressure in the teeth and a shimmer at the edge of vision. With 6 of the Emperor's fragments now gathered in one place, Echo's strategy, Terra's biokinesis, Chronos' foresight, Aegis' empathy, Warden's duty, and the lingering imprint of the architect's order in the very walls, their combined psychic signatures were beginning to warp local reality. Conduits pulsed with light in time with no discernible rhythm. Tools left on a workbench vibrated and slid of their own accord. In a corner of the hangar bay, the light bent strangely, creating a shimmering mirage of a corridor that was not there. They were not yet unified, but their proximity was like tuning forks struck too close together, creating a harmonic that space-time itself struggled to contain. Dr. Thorne watched these distortions with a feverish mix of awe and terror. He rushed to the central console, his fingers flying. The long-range sensor array, freed from Warden's lockdown protocols, came online with a flood of data. What it showed stole the breath from the room. 2 catastrophic signals were converging on their coordinates from opposite vectors. From the inner galaxy, a formation of Regency dreadnoughts, led by the unmistakable signature of Grand Marshal Sigma's flagship, advanced with cold, methodical precision. Their weapons were hot, their approach vectors aggressive. They were coming for a final, surgical excision, and from the outer dark, the true nightmare approached. The Vex swarm's main tendril was no longer a theoretical threat on a scanner. It was a wave of psychic static so vast it blotted out the stars behind it, a wall of silent, geometric hunger moving faster than any natural law should allow. It did not travel through space so much as unknit it, leaving a scar of null signature in its wake. They were caught in a pincer with the station's own destabilizing reality caught between the jaws. "We have run out of time," Thorne said, his voice cracking. "The resonance is a beacon they can both see. We must initiate the unification protocol now." "The chamber is ready. It is our only chance to generate a psychic field powerful enough to repel them both." Echo Prime analyzed the tactical display, the twin blights of red and static green swallowing the screen. The logical conclusion was inescapable. Thorne is correct. A consolidated consciousness represents the only force multiplier capable of addressing two existential threats simultaneously. To hesitate is to accept annihilation, but Chronos had gone very still, his bi-colored eyes seeing not the screen but a cascade of terrible tomorrows. He swayed on his feet, and a thin line of blood trickled from his nose. "No," he whispered, the word a ragged breath. "You are missing the variable. The moment of unity is not a moment of strength. It is the moment of greatest vulnerability." All eyes turned to him. He looked up, his gaze filled with a final, terrifying vision. Sigma knows he has not come to destroy the chamber. He has come to use it. His fleet is not just an armada. It is a focusing lens. He will wait for the precise instant our consciousnesses merge, when our combined psychic output is at its peak, but before we can achieve coherence. And he will fire every weapon in his arsenal, not at the station, but at that raw, erupting psychic signal. He will use the chamber's own energy to overload us, to shatter the unified mind at the moment of its birth. His logic is flawless. He lets us build the weapon, and then he uses it to kill us with our own power. The revelation landed like a physical blow. Thorne's face went ashen. Sigma would turn the crucible into a bomb. The Vex, drawn to the same psychic eruption, would then consume the shattered remnants. It was a perfect trap, one that accounted for their every move, turning their last, desperate hope into the instrument of their total erasure. "So we are damned if we do, and damned if we do not," Aegis said softly, the weight of the impending agony, both physical and psychic, already pressing against his senses. "Not necessarily," Echo Prime said, his mind racing through the new parameters. "Chronos has provided the key data. We now know Sigma's strategy and his trigger. This changes the tactical landscape. We must control the conditions of unification. We must make our moment of vulnerability into a weapon he cannot predict." Outside the viewports, the first glittering points of the Regency fleet pierced the starfield, while from the other direction, the void itself seemed to curdle and darken. The gathering storm had arrived, and the sanctuary was about to become the most violent crossroads in galactic history. The three-way battle would not be fought just with ships and energy weapons, but with timelines, with consciousness itself, and with the desperate choice of what a mind is willing to become when every path leads to ruin. The first ships to pierce the sanctuary's defensive perimeter were not Regency dreadnoughts, but a single, sleek command shuttle. It docked without challenge, the airlock cycling with a soft, official hiss. Grand Marshal Sigma stepped through, alone and unarmed, his polished armor reflecting the chamber's unstable light. He had not come with a fleet at his back for the first strike. He had come to deliver the final piece of the puzzle himself. "I have come to negotiate your surrender," Sigma announced, his voice carrying that same flat, analytical tone. "The Regency fleet will hold position. Their weapons are a contingency. I offer you a more efficient solution." His eyes, cold and calculating, swept over his siblings. "The unity you seek is inevitable. The question is not if it happens, but who controls the resulting consciousness. The Regency wishes to dismantle you. The Architect wishes to subsume you into a sterile collective. Both are wasteful." Echo Prime took a step forward, his body tense as a coiled spring. "State your terms." "My terms are simple," Sigma replied. You willingly interface with the Unity Chamber, but not as 12 merging equals. You will merge with me. My consciousness will be the framework, the primary operating system. Your fragments will be integrated as subordinate processes. In this way, we preserve a clear chain of command. We achieve the necessary psychic mass to repel the Vex, while maintaining the order and decisive will required to govern the aftermath. It is the logical conclusion. A terrible understanding dawned on Dr. Thorne. You do not serve the Regency at all. You are using them, their fleet, their legitimacy. It is all a tool to corner us here, to force this choice. Sigma offered a thin, humorless smile. Correct. The Regency believes I deliver you to their laboratories. They are useful idiots. The Emperor's fatal flaw was his divided heart, his sentiment, his empathy, his endless debate. He created us to be perfect, singular aspects of himself, yet he feared what a reassembled whole would become. I have no such fear. I am the aspect of pure, unsentimental logic. I see the equation clearly. One supreme mind is more efficient than 12 squabbling ones. Unity under my directive is not a risk, it is an upgrade. As he spoke, a faint, high-pitched whine began to emanate from his armor. Tiny, almost invisible ports opened along his collar and wrists, emitting a shimmering distortion field. You have had your chance to choose, Sigma said, his voice gaining a subtle, resonant edge. The time for debate is over. I will now claim what is necessary. He raised a hand, not in a gesture, but as a focus. The distortion field snapped outward, not as an attack, but as a voracious pull. It was a psychic siphon, a vortex of pure will designed not to harm the body, but to drain the mind. And it found its first, most vulnerable target, Aegis. The empathic clone, still weakened from his ordeal on the station, cried out, a sound of pure, undiluted agony. He did not fall. He was held upright by the invisible force, his body rigid. A visible stream of shimmering golden light, the essence of his empathic power, began to tear from his chest, flowing across the chamber into Sigma's waiting form. Sigma's eyes flashed with a colder, brighter light as he absorbed it. His posture straightened, and an aura of palpable, soothing calm radiated from him momentarily, a sickening parody of Aegis' own gift. He was not just stealing power, he was consuming identity. The Emperor feared a monster, Sigma declared, his voice now layered with a haunting echo of Aegis' compassion, twisted into something placid and controlling. He did not understand that the only true monster is inefficiency. Your empathy will allow me to predict and pacify the masses. Your strategy will grant me unbeatable tactics. Your foresight will let me navigate all possible futures. I will be the perfect, undivided ruler the galaxy requires. Aegis slumped to his knees, the golden light fading from his eyes, replaced by a hollow, empty stare. The first fragment had been taken. The siphoning field pulsed, growing stronger, already seeking its next connection among the horrified clones. Sigma's betrayal was complete. He hadn't come to destroy the Unity Chamber. He had come to become its sole, terrible occupant. The station's hull screamed. It was not the sound of metal tearing, but of reality itself being peeled back. The Vex swarm did not blast through the armor. They unwove it, dissolving a whole section of the outer wall into shimmering geometric dust. Through the impossible breach, the true swarm poured in, not a single scout, but a tide of shifting, crystalline horrors. They flowed like liquid metal and moved with the jerking precision of broken clocks, their forms a blasphemy against biology and machinery alike. The psychic static that preceded them was a physical blow, a wave of mind-numbing hunger that washed over everyone in the chamber. Chaos became the only law. A Regency Marine, his training forgotten, fired his pulse rifle on full auto into a flowing mass of black crystal. The entity absorbed the energy, reconfigured, and lashed out with a tendril that didn't cut, but dissolved the man's armor and the flesh beneath into the same glittering dust. A Vex form shaped like a spinning, jagged wheel carved through a cluster of fleeing technicians, leaving only silence and drifting ash in its wake. Sigma's siphoning field flickered as he was forced to divert his attention, raising a personal shield of distorted space to deflect a probing tendril. The battle was no longer clone against clone. It was a three-way slaughter, a frantic melee where the only common goal was a desperate, immediate survival. Kael saw it all in frozen snapshots. Echo Prime was a blur, using a shattered conduit as a spear, shattering a Vex form only for two more to flow into its place. Terra had her back to a wall, her hands pressed against the deck, making the very floor erupt in spines of hardened biopolymer that impaled one horror before being dissolved by another. Chronos was shouting warnings that were lost in the din, blood streaming from his nose as he tried to track too many terrible futures at once, and Aegis lay motionless near Sigma's feet, his essence stolen, his body an empty shell. Dr. Thorne was huddled behind a shattered console, his glasses cracked, staring at the apocalyptic scene with the wide-eyed horror of a man witnessing the end of his own life's work. The Unity Chamber, that perfect dark sphere, sat untouched in the center of the carnage, its control nexus glowing with dormant potential. It was the eye of the storm, and it was useless. A thought, cold and clear, cut through Kael's panic. Sigma wanted to use the chamber to become a god. The Vex wanted to consume whatever came out of it. The other clones were being picked apart, caught between a thief and a devourer. The protocol was a death sentence, but it was the only tool left in the room. He didn't plan, he moved. Dodging a slashing crystal limb, he sprinted across the open space, grabbed Thorne by the front of his lab coat, and hauled him to his feet. With all his strength, he shoved the stunned scientist toward the raised platform of the chamber's control nexus. Thorne stumbled forward, catching himself on the glowing interface. "Do it now, Doc," Kael shouted, his voice raw over the shrieks of metal and the silent psychic scream of the Vex. His eyes locked with Thorne's, conveying a final, brutal instruction. "Before Sigma drains them dry or the Vex eat us all, initiate the protocol, fuse them, but do it your way, not his." Thorne looked from Kael's desperate face to the chamber, to his children fighting and dying around him. He saw Sigma, already recovering, turning his siphon field back toward a struggling Terra. He saw the Vex swarm thickening, the very air growing cold with their null signature. The doctor's hands, which had built and scattered and dreamed of this moment for centuries, hovered over the controls. This was not the controlled, willing unification he had envisioned. This was a triage, a brutal emergency splice performed in the middle of a battlefield. It would be messy, it would be violent, it might create the very monster everyone feared. But Kael was right. It was the only choice left that was still, in some small way, theirs. With a sob that was part grief, part defiance, Aris Thorne brought his palms down on the activation panel. The Unity Chamber awoke with a sound like a dying star being born. The chamber's core ignited with a light that was not a color but a feeling. It was the warmth of a sun and the cold of the void, the logic of a perfect equation and the grief of a dying world, all woven into a single, expanding radiance. Dr. Thorne, his hands trembling on the controls, watched as Warden stood resolute beside him, his fragment of duty now redirected not to obey a dead command, but to protect the terrifying potential of this moment. The merging sequence was not a gentle blending, it was a violent, beautiful collision. Strands of consciousness, visible as ribbons of iridescent energy, tore free from each clone. Echo's strategic certainty, Terra's nurturing sorrow, Chronos' fractured timelines, Aegis' stolen empathy now reclaimed, Warden's unwavering resolve, all of them, along with the dormant signatures of the 6 still lost fragments, were ripped from their individual vessels and hurled into the chamber's heart. Sigma's scream cut through the harmonic roar, a sound of pure, incandescent fury that twisted abruptly into agony. His parasitic siphon, still attached to the gestalt, did not drain it. The flow reversed. The forming unified consciousness was a gravity well, and Sigma's own essence, his cold, perfect logic, was torn from him. He was not being invited. He was being consumed, his individuality unraveling and adding its thread to the tapestry whether he willed it or not. He fought it, his form shuddering, but the pull was absolute. In that final second, the Grand Marshal of the Regency, the believer in pure order, became the last component forcibly integrated. The light coalesced, then dimmed to a manageable glow. Within the chamber, a figure stood, though figure was not quite right. It was a human shape outlined in stable light, its features shifting subtly, echoing all 12 faces at once. When it spoke, the voice was a chorus, layered and harmonized, the sound of a council speaking with one will. The fragmentation ends, we remember the fear. We remember the design, we remember the love for a galaxy that was our charge. The voice paused, the light within the chamber pulsing softly, containing eons of memory and moments of fresh, unified thought. We are the architect of the protocol, the warden of the duty, the echo of the command. We are the empathy that felt its cost and the foresight that dreaded this day. We are the last emperor. A wave of power, calm and immense, radiated outward from the sanctuary. It was not an attack, it was an announcement. A declaration of presence so profound it momentarily stilled the chaos of the battle. The Vex swarm, for the first time, hesitated. The silent, devouring static met a psychic signature of equal and opposite complexity, a mind not to be consumed but to be comprehended. The newborn consciousness turned its gaze inward and outward at once, assessing its own nature and the immediate threats, no longer fragmented but whole. The question hanging in the air was no longer if it could act, but what this impossible, reassembled soul would choose to do first. The unified consciousness did not raise a hand or fire a weapon. It simply turned its gaze upon the Vex swarm, and reality obeyed. The chaotic tide of dissolving crystal and null static slammed into an invisible wall not of energy but of solidified causality. The Emperor Reborn imposed a new law upon local spacetime. The Vex could not advance. Their method of travel, which relied on unraveling the fabric of possibility, met a barrier where possibility itself had been rendered absolute, fixed, and unchangeable. The swarm recoiled, its geometric forms shifting in frantic, silent patterns as it encountered a mind that could not only defend itself, but rewrite the rules of the battlefield. The psychic scream of hunger was abruptly replaced by a hum of frustrated calculation. For the first time in its existence, the devourer had met something it could not digest, a will as fundamental as physics. Then the chorus of voices turned toward the Regency fleet, their weapons still hot and targeting solutions locked on the sanctuary. The voice that rolled across the comms was a paradox. It held Echo Prime's tactical certainty, Aegis' deep compassion, and the undeniable, weathered timbre of the man they had all sworn to serve centuries ago. The air you follow is a puppet. The words were not an accusation, but a statement of fact delivered with the weight of 12 lifetimes of memory. Stand down. Your duty is to the survival of all, not to a throne. On the bridge of every ship, view screens flickered, not with a transmission, but with a direct psychic imprint. Crew members saw, felt, and knew the truth in an instant. They felt the cold, manipulative logic of Sigma's plan, saw the terrifying scale of the Vex threat looming in the dark, and understood in their very bones the genuine, agonized purpose behind the unified being before them. It was not a usurper, it was the fulfillment of an old oath paid for with the sacrifice of 12 individual souls. The will to fight evaporated, weapons powered down. Thrusters disengaged, the surrender was not one of defeat but of profound, humbling recognition. The war was over and a stranger kind of peace had begun. In the silence that followed, the Emperor Reborn looked upon its own hands that were both solid and ephemeral, a construct of light and will. It remembered being Kael, the scavenger who asked what they wanted to be. It remembered the grief of Terra and the weary foresight of Chronos. Those individual desires were not gone. They were the foundation of every thought, the harmonic notes in its single, overwhelming song. The throne room was a shattered laboratory, the crown was a burden of impossible memory, and the first act of this new reign was not conquest, but a desperate, holding action against an infinite night. The unified mind had won the battle. Now it faced a far more complex question. What does a god do when its only purpose is to stand between creation and the end of everything? The psychic wall at the galactic rim did not shimmer or glow. It was an absence, a line drawn in the fabric of reality itself where the vexed swarm's silent scream simply stopped. The unified consciousness of the last emperor did not destroy the devourers. It could not. Instead, it wove its own being into the laws of that boundary space, becoming a permanent, living bulwark. Its mind was the mortar holding the barrier together, a constant, monumental exertion of will that required its full and eternal attention. The entity turned from the rim, its form already growing less distinct, diffusing into the invisible architecture of the shield. To Kael, who stood amidst the quiet wreckage of the sanctuary, it spoke one final time. The chorus of voices was softer now, strained by the infinite task it had just begun. "You gave us a choice," it said, and the gratitude in those words held the warmth of Terra, the certainty of Echo, the sorrow of Chronos. "We choose this. The galaxy is yours to rebuild." Then the light that had been a man, and then 12, and then 1, simply faded. It did not vanish, it relocated. Its presence migrated to the edge of everything, settling into a vigil from which it would never look away. The weight of that sacrifice settled over the survivors, a silence more profound than any explosion. The Emperor was not dead, it was on duty forever. And in its absence, it left a universe of terrifying freedom. Kael, the scavenger from Viridia, looked at his hands. They were just hands, no imperial memories, no world-shaping power. Dr. Thorne stood beside him, an old man broken and redeemed by the consequences of his love. Around them, the surviving Regency officers and crew moved in a daze, their purpose shattered, their false air unmasked. There was no government, no fleet with clear orders, only a scattered, wounded civilization and a vast, empty throne that was now a monument to a different kind of rule. The work was not glorious, it was the slow, grinding labor of trust. Kael found he had a talent for it. He spoke not with the voice of command, but with the blunt honesty of the salvage yards. He told the truth about what had happened, about the clones and their sacrifice, about the wall at the rim and the guardian who maintained it. He let Thorne explain the science, and the former Regency officers, shamed and galvanized, organized the logistics. They began not with palaces, but with supply lines, not with coronations, but with clearing wreckage and re-establishing communications between terrified, isolated worlds. The message was simple: the immediate threat is over, the Guardian is at the gate. Now we must learn to be our own keepers. One evening, in a makeshift command center aboard a repurposed Regency carrier, Kael looked at a star chart. The galaxy was no longer an empire, it was a collection of possibilities, fragile and bright. He was not a king, he was a custodian, a humble lock who had once held a key. And as the first new agreements between independent systems flickered across the screen, he understood the true shape of their victory. They had been saved not by a ruler, but by a choice. And the future, for the first time in 1,000 years, was unwritten. The salvage yards of Port Viridia were quiet now, the air no longer thick with the ozone of desperation and quick deals. Kael stood in what had once been a smuggler's den, now a clearinghouse for coordinating relief efforts. Before him, a holographic star chart glowed, its usual traffic lanes and conflict zones replaced by simpler routes for supply convoys and diplomatic envoys. His eyes were drawn to the very edge of the display, to the silent, static line that marked the galactic rim. There was no label there, no flashing icon. But everyone knew what it was. The final frontier was not a place of exploration anymore. It was a wall, and on the other side of that wall, a silent guardian held back the dark. It was a peace that felt less like victory and more like a breath held in collective relief. in a sealed laboratory on the other side of the port, Dr. Aris Thorne worked under the watchful eyes of former Regency engineers. Their task was not creation, but careful, methodical dismantling. They took apart stasis pods, erased genetic blueprints, and melted down the specialized alloys used in the Unity Chamber's construction. Thorne's hands, which had once trembled with the excitement of creation, now moved with a solemn, steady purpose. He spoke little, but when he did, his vow was clear. "We will not archive this. We will not preserve it for study. We burn the instructions. The mistake was not in the science, but in the belief that a single mind, however vast, could be trusted with the fate of all others. I will spend my remaining days ensuring no one can follow my footsteps." One evening, as Kael reviewed a proposal for a new system-wide council, a body with no single leader, only rotating speakers, a familiar resonance brushed against his thoughts. It was not a voice, not exactly. It was a feeling, a concept impressed directly upon his consciousness, gentle as a shadow and as vast as the void. It carried the weight of strategy, the warmth of empathy, the patience of foresight. The message was simple, a final whisper from the being that had once been 12. "We are not a weapon nor a king. We are a promise. Protect each other." And then it was gone, leaving behind not an echo but a certainty. The guardian at the rim was not a ruler dispensing justice. It was a sentinel, its entire existence a vow made to every living soul within the galaxy's spiral arms. Its sacrifice had purchased them a chance, not a destiny. The work of building a lasting peace, of truly protecting each other, that was a burden it had deliberately left in their hands. The story of the clones of the last emperor does not end with a coronation or a grand parade. It ends with a quiet galaxy, its scars still healing, learning to walk without the crutch of an imperial throne. The legacy is not one of power, but of a terrible, beautiful choice. A ruler so devoted to his people that he allowed himself to be shattered to save them, and fragments so human in their struggle that they chose to become a shield rather than a sword. The silence they guard is not empty. It is full of the fragile, ordinary, precious noise of life continuing, a noise they made possible and one they will never hear for themselves.